I'm Rob Akins. I'm one of the senior advisors and mentors for the Junior Investigators Network. And I wanted to talk a few minutes and answer any questions you guys might have about changes and how you keep up with changes in NIH submission and review processes. There's some new things coming, and there's been some consistent, maybe confusion and interest, especially from some of our admin groups, about aspects of submissions. So can you go to the next slide? I'll turn my camera up because I have to turn my phone sideways so I can read my own slides. All right. Do that. All right, so we're currently, the way NIH works, and you guys probably all know this, they letter the forms that they generate, and when there's big changes, they go to another set of forms. So we're currently in what's called Forms H. If you have to download any forms yourself for a specific grant you're working on, those are the forms you want. And they're updated fairly routinely. Forms H kicked in just over a year ago, and there were some big changes. Forms H is when the data management plans, for example, kicked in. So since January of 2023, we've been on Forms H. Aaron will share these slides, or we can post them. So you can just go to the link if you want to see what Forms H are all about. And NIH does notifications whenever they do anything. They put on an NOT. It's a notification. So there's some language from the notification about Forms H. Can you go on to the next slide? They also publish what was changed. So when they went to Forms H, and when they went to the most recent update, which is extended out until 2026, and you'll see the top, so your BioSketch form, that's the date they want. So we're in Forms H. The current forms should all be dated out into the expiration date of 2026. But you can, with the link that's provided on this slide, you can go see what changed. So the most recent changes didn't do a lot, and they had a lot to do with the data management plans and budgeting for data management plans. But the key is the date at the top. So one of the things that didn't change, can you go to the next slide? But we still, the professional development core for CTR and sort of the mentoring teams and the mentors still get a lot of questions about it. But nothing changed going into Forms H, nothing changed about BioSketches, but BioSketches were updated in 2021. And there's still some issues, especially for there's like a bimodal population, people who are brand new and have never written a BioSketch before, or people like me that are used to the older ones, so before 2021. So if you're working with a colleague or a collaborator that hasn't submitted a grant because they didn't have to, or they just weren't interested since 2021, they're likely not on the new format. And even folks who have, because NIH often has a pretty forgiving nature on some of these form updates, the forms might not be completely up to date. So there's a quick snip, and there's the link. And again, Aaron or someone can share these to the directions for the BioSketch. But I just quickly want to go over some of the high-level things that we're hearing quite often about Forms H BioSketches. Go to the next page. So the personal statement, and there's three sections that we'll talk about. The personal statement really should make sure that you talk about your role on the project. We often see, and you'll get comments, especially in peer reviews or in kind of pre-review of your BioSketch. The BioSketch personal statement is not just supposed to be a one-size-fits-all statement about your experience. That information is included, but you should always include, and I suggest to include at the beginning, what your role is, and then briefly describe how well suited you are for that role. And you have to provide enough information if you're a collaborator or a mentor or you're working with someone else. You want to make sure that the reader understands that you know the other person, how you've worked together before, how you're suited for this project, and kind of acknowledge what you're going to do. And then any aspects of your training, these are things you should include. And I should say, kind of at a top level, you have 5 pages. So if there's something you want to include, NIH doesn't really provide a whole lot of, you can't say that here, except for one section that we'll talk about at the end, which has been moved. But you only have 5 pages. So the things you should include are what they list in the directions. So that's your role, aspects of your training that help you develop the skills to fill that role, any previous work you've done, especially on that specific or related topics, your technical expertise, your collaborators or scientific environment, and think this is project specific, right? Every biosketch goes in with a different personal statement. So if you're a collaborating investigator, say with me, you should mention me, and that we published before, and that we've worked together on this, or at least we have aligned interests, because that's what the personal statement is for. Right, and think it's read by someone, and this is one of the things that people pay attention to. I read the personal statements and bio sketches just to get an idea of how the people, the investigators already work together. You can also explain if you had gaps. You took care of your family, or you had clinical responsibilities, so there's a gap in your trajectory. You can put that kind of information in your personal statement too. In fact, it's suggested that you put it there. Okay. So that's the personal statement. The biggest thing that we're seeing is that people don't say what they're doing on the grant that's being submitted. And there are bio sketches for pilot grants and bio sketches for all kinds of grants. So just make sure you say what you're going to do on that grant. Is there a question? Okay, can you go to the next slide, Aaron? Then there's the position, scientific appointments, and honors. And this has come up frequently, at least in my world, when looking at junior investigators or hearing about junior investigators, bio sketches. So section B really has two components to it. NIH doesn't prescribe that you have to split these two topics into two different lists. So I've seen it done multiple different ways. In fact, they give a sample that doesn't quite split it exactly the way they talk about it. So there's some latitude in how section B is presented. But the things that you need to provide, and these are in reverse chronologic order from when you got them, but it's your current positions and appointments. And part of that, one of the audiences that looks at your biosketch are the admins at NIH and the admins at the multiple institutions that might be involved in the project. So you, in a way, should disclose to them anything that's relevant in terms of your positions. So for example, if you're working with a company in the grant and you have a role, an unpaid role as an advisor to them, you should actually put it here and you should disclose it elsewhere so that it's clear to everyone who's looking at the document. But the expectation is that you'll include any current position in reverse chronologic order when you got it, that's related or relevant to the proposal. And that's paid or unpaid, affiliated appointments, adjunct appointments, honorary appointments, anything like that that's expected. And then there's the second part are any relevant academic or professional achievements and honors. And this is a much broader category. But again, think about the proposal that the biosketch is going with, and the fact that you have 5 pages total, right? So you don't really want to waste space, but any relevant honors or professional achievements you can include. In particular, if you're a student, a postdoc, or brand new faculty, they want you to, right? This is not an order or anything. It includes scholarships or traineeships, fellowships, anything like that. As you get older, those things are less relevant as you get further along in your career. But there's nothing that actually prohibits you from including something that you think is relevant and that would help the reviewers. And those are scientific reviewers and administrative reviewers. And clinicians should include their licensures, any specialty board certifications, because it sort of defines them in terms of their skill sets, related to, and often not even directly related to, but at least related to their biomedical expertise. Right, but the biggest thing that you should, and the expectation is that you will include, are all of your relevant current positions. Right, so make sure you update. One of the reasons they put this in is people would submit the same biosketch over and over again, and they don't update it with a new position that may be at an affiliated institution, that there's a relationship in the grant that you should be sort of indicating in your biosketch. And then C, I'll talk about quickly, if that's the next slide, I think. Aaron? I hope I'm still okay.
It should be up. It seems to be slow. So I think I see it now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you do. Yeah.
I had like a little minor panic attack that I was disconnected. It's like, oh, great. That's happened before. So there's the third major section, and again, there used to be four, little foreshadowing. There used to be a section D, but the third major section are your contributions to science. And this is often difficult to write and something you shouldn't wait to work on because people, again, reviewers, myself included, look at these. So we're trying to see kind of what you've done in the past. And these are supposed to be brief, the whole thing and you get up to only four references that can go with the contribution, no more than half a page. Half a page is actually a lot for one of these. And you can add up to 5, but don't feel like you have to. There's a little bit of a balancing act, again, especially if you're junior or, new faculty that's going after their first grant. You want to make sure you explain things you did. You don't want to look like you're overclaiming things. So there's a lot of work you should do with your mentor to get these things structured. But it should have the background, the central findings, right? What was the problem? What did you work on? What were the central findings? What was the influence or the impact of that work? And then your specific role. So and don't think, I mean, contributions to science they don't have to lead to a publication. There are other ways to contribute, and you can explain those in this section. And it's a very powerful way, especially to, again, I'm older, so to like show people what you worked on during different phases of your career. As you're younger, you're just using this as an opportunity, especially to explain things that don't show up elsewhere because they're not publications, right? And you can put work products, you can't put figures or tables, but you can put work products in, including publications, up to 4, but they don't have to be publications. If you worked on a website or you contributed, to a data science GitHub page or something like that, you can put that in as part of your contributions to science. And then at the very end, you should, again, NIH doesn't order you around very much for this kind of thing. They tell you what you should put in here. There's some things that they want you to put in. You may provide a hyperlink, which is what NIH says. If you do provide a hyperlink, it has to be a federal hyperlink. Can't be Google Scholar or ResearchGate or anything like that. And they recommend using my bibliography, which is at NCBI, right? So that's the National Library of Medicine. And the link's embedded here, and hopefully everyone's familiar with those URLs. You should go in and check your profile to make sure in your My Bibliography that your published works are getting pulled over correctly, and that you can cite them. And in fact, on that web page, there's functionality which is taking a while for NIH to fully implement. But one of the goals that's been discussed by NIH is that long-term biosketches will be generated by the NCBI. So your works, you'll go in and put your personal statement there. In fact, you can generate a biosketch at that website. And if anyone's interested in doing that, let me know. Or you can just find the link. It's in the directions, like in the instructions for biosketches. In the general instructions for grant preparation, the link's in there. It's called My Science CB, right? So that's biosketches. Again, that's not new. Those changes were announced and they're tracked, but they're not. I think biosketches are something that people don't think about frequently. So some of these changes aren't at the top of mind, and it's certainly not intuitive how to do a biosketch if you're doing one for the first time. So there was a section D. That was where your other support used to go. Other support is now its own page. And I didn't talk about this in section A in the personal statement. You can include your support, anything up to within the past 3 years in your personal statement. So section D is gone. The other thing which is new, these data management plans, those are a year old now, the requirement. So hopefully everyone has at least thought about how they're going to do it or submitted one. NIH has spruced up and added more information about how to write them. And in fact, I can't see which website this is. The NIGMS has very excellent examples of language to use in data management plans. So I just wanted to draw people's attention to the data management and sharing instructions, information, FAQs are much more robust, including the website that's here. All right, and then finally, the thing that's coming that started the request here, because NIH has been talking about this and now they've announced it, are big changes in the NIH peer review process. So those are going to kick in 2025. So we're getting ready this year. Reviewers and people writing grants are starting to adapt to the changes that are happening. The notice, right? So NOT is notice, OD is the Office of the Director. You can see that box over on the right. That's the guide notice that talks about this. But the idea is they want reviewers to focus more on answering key questions about the science and what's been proposed. So the key questions they want answers is, should the research project be conducted, and can the proposed research project be conducted, right? And I'll show you how they're splitting things up. This is to mitigate a huge bias, a reputational bias that's seen in NIH submissions, and at the same time reduce the burden on reviewers. They're trying to streamline things as much as possible. So you go to the next slide, please. So to improve reviewer focus, there used to be 5 review criteria. I'll show those in a second if you aren't familiar. Those are getting focused down. And there's some additional review criteria, which is inclusion across the lifespan. So are you including children or humans across the lifespan, that kind of thing. And the study timeline are being moved into what's called now Factor 2. There's a reduction in reputational bias. So the investigator environment part is sort of being demoted. It's still talked about, but it's not given an individual score. And then most of the additional review considerations that reviewers were asked to comment on and review during study section are being switched over to administrative staff. Because quite frankly, having reviewed quite a bit, the reviewers only make recommendations. So it's sort of a wasted step. The NIH staff probably know before the reviewer even says anything that there's an issue or a problem there. And ultimately to get the strongest and highest impact research funded. Next slide. So you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the 5 categories that are on the left. So up until January of 2025, so one more year, significance, investigators, innovation, approach, environment are all scored the same way. And then afterwards, the simplified framework has 3, only 2 of which are actually scored. So there's 3 factors, and they're all considered in the overall impact score. So the importance of the research, right? And this is sort of based on the assumption that you could do it, right? There's no, how important is it to answer this question? Factor 2 will address specifically rigor and feasibility of the approach. And that will include, for human subjects, will include some things that had been in different parts of the grant before. So those will get NIH scores. And then the investigator environment, Factor 3, it's mostly evaluated for potential gaps. We should have a biostatistician kind of thing added to the grant. And it's considered, but it's not scored. So that's actually a big change. I haven't seen any guidance yet. I haven't looked, but I haven't seen any, come across any emails or anything for reviewers. I'm sure anybody who's currently on study section is probably already hearing about how these changes are going to be implemented after January 25th. Give me the next slide. And for those who are interested in, I'll try to attend. I think we'll try to let as many of the admins know as possible. There is a webinar that'll happen on the 17th, so in a couple of weeks. You have to register for it to get the link, but it's to talk about the simplified framework. RPGs are research R grants, R01s in particular, and then how it will be implemented and what the impact is expected to be. That will be recorded Usually you can get the recordings without registering, but I would suggest registering if you're interested. It's Zoom, and I know NIH has hosted quite a large number of people on their Zoom calls before. And again, Aaron, you can put this, if you haven't done so already, into the chat so people can have the slides, the links right there to register. And for the folks at Moore, a few of you, I forwarded it with the time blocked off to see if you can register and attend. Right. And then next slide. That's right. So this is there is a link here if you want to keep informed. So there's the webinar, and then there's also additional guidance and briefings and FAQs that are getting more and more populated that are hosted on the NIH website about the upcoming review changes. It's unclear. Usually what happens is the change happens, and then both people submitting and people reviewing adapt to them. So I'm not sure a whole lot will change in how you think about or write grants, but hopefully strong grants that, coming from idea states like Delaware, from our institutions, will get a fairer shake in the new design. And the SROs and the study section chairs will be called upon to make sure. So, for example, the feasibility of the study is different than the impact of the study. Those things tend to all get merged together the way discussion happens now, but the significance should be considered separately from your approach and the feasibility of you completing the study. So I think that in the long run will help states like Delaware and other idea states. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions with as much information as I have. And the group will keep you informed as much as possible about changes and then interpretation of the changes and how people are accommodating with the different requests and the changing system that's happening in NIH.